to Only Sounds. Recently, I've been looking at a lot of horror documentaries. I've been churning away through some of those really long In Search of Darkness documentaries. I've recently looked at the 1990 to 94 and the 95 to 99 as well. And in the past, I've gone through 14 hours of the In Search of Darkness 1980s Blu-rays, which are out there, directed by David A. Weiner. These particular ones here, parts 1, 2, and 3. There's, as I said, there's around 14 hours worth of stuff on here. If you're a 80s horror fan, they're an absolute must. And I've been involved with these guys at Creator VC as a backer for, the past 6 or 7 years now. They've got another one coming out in, I think this year, called Slasher Trash as well, which I've obviously backed. The In Search of Darkness Blu-rays are incredibly dense in terms of the amount of films that they cover, but it is more like they concentrate for a few minutes on each title. So if you're a fan of any particular title, the chances are you're not going to learn anything particularly new. However, if you're an 80s horror fan and there are titles in there that you haven't seen before, it's a great tool to add some of those titles to your watch list, and you'll learn something about them as well in the process. It's a full-on love letter to 80s horror and done really well. It's quite glossy. There's a lot of really good talking heads in there. Sometimes they get enough money to bring in some real big guns to talk on them as well, which is really quite nice. So I've always praised Creator VC for their ambition and tapping into this little niche of 80s horror and really delivering the goods when it comes to how cool these documentaries are. And as horror fans, it's nice to kind of just have them on in the background if you're working in a place like this, or you're just at home pottering around. I often have something like that on in the background just to immerse myself in the 80s horror before I maybe do a live stream or something. So I always find them really handy that way. They are a little light on critique, but I would always say that if you're an 80s horror fan, they are quite essential viewing. I'm sure over the next few years they'll start covering the 2000s and the 2010s, but for now the 80s and 90s documentaries that they've done are certainly worth a watch. Going back a few years, if you go back to around about 2010, David Cash and Daniel Farrens brought out this one here. This documentary called Never Sleep Again, which is all based around the Elm Street franchise. It is the sort of gold standard of horror documentaries, concentrating on one franchise for a period of around about 4 hours. You get some really in-depth interviews, and they did this particular documentary around the right time when all of the cast and the stars in the film were still alive and of an age when they could still remember quite profoundly a lot of the details from the movies. So you get some real exceptional access to talent involved in these films, and they're all really quite candid interviews as well. You know, people are really honest about the highs and the lows of the series, particularly the New Line execs. And despite its 4 hour length or 4 hours 20-minute length or whatever it is, it has a really strong structure throughout, and it feels about the right length for one of these documentaries. As I said before with In Search of Darkness, a lot of these things do tend to go on for a long time, but Never Sleep Again was about the right length, and it's incredibly easy to go through it in probably maybe 1 or even 2 sittings. Back in 2010, I'd say it was the benchmark for horror documentaries, and 101 Films brought this Blu-ray out a few years ago, and yeah, it looks tremendous. It's a good upgrade on the DVD that I had for quite some time. There's a recent documentary called Chain Reactions, which came out just a few months ago here. There's the Blu-ray there. It's based around the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just the original film. Now, a lot of people are kind of hoodwinked into thinking that this is an in-depth documentary on the movie, and it's quite the opposite. It isn't actually that. It's a bunch of people giving their thoughts on the movie. I think there's 4 people on there: Patton Oswalt, Stephen King, Takeshi Miike, amongst others as well. So it's kind of a talking heads look at the influence of this movie on these particular people. I think Patton Oswalt's section is probably the most interesting, as is Stephen King's as well. That's pretty fascinating to listen to. But this isn't something where you're going to get any behind the scenes footage or, you know, anecdotes from the set that you haven't heard from before. This is more of a thesis on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. People telling you about their own personal experiences with the film and how it's impacted their lives. definitely worth a watch. And if you get the US version of this, you get umpteen different versions of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre included with it as well. So yeah, Chain Reactions, if you're a fan of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is definitely one that I can recommend. But don't expect a making of. It's certainly not that whatsoever. Next up is More Brains, a Return of the Living Dead documentary that came out about 15 years ago, around about 2011, directed by Bill Philpott. It's usually served as an extra on any kind of recent Return of the Living Dead Blu-ray or 4K that you can get. The recent Arrow version has a Blu-ray edition on this. It's a feature-length documentary, probably around, I think it's around about 2 hours. And again, a documentary that was done at the right time when a lot of the cast was still living. You know, Clu Gulager's in here. I think James Cameron's there as well, and Don Calfa. It's got a real kind of punk energy throughout, a real anarchic tone. It kind of matches the spirit of the film itself. I'll admit it's a little rough around the edges at times, but it has a lot of charm and definitely, you know, real comfort viewing for Return of the Living Dead fans. So yeah, More Brains. If you haven't seen More Brains, it's usually served as an extra on any Return of the Living Dead Blu-ray or 4K. I'd recommend it. It's got some great stuff in there. It really has. Similarly with Creepshow, I think this has got to be like 20 years old now, 2007, 19 years old. Available on this UK Blu-ray as an extra. Just Desserts, which is a 90-minute Creepshow documentary directed by Michael Felsher. A lot of Creepshow Blu-rays and 4Ks these days don't include that documentary on them. You have to buy it separately. But I was lucky enough to get this. Oh, wow. When would I have got this now? This must be 2013, this particular Blu-ray. Second Sight's Blu-ray of Creepshow, and it's included on here. So I'm lucky to have this. Like I say, you can buy it as a standalone documentary. It is definitely worth a watch. There are some amazing anecdotes on there, particularly when it comes to their creeping up on you and Tom Savini's talking about the cockroaches in the film. It's a really warm and affectionate tribute to Creepshow and leans heavily into Stephen King and George Romero nostalgia throughout it. It's light on criticism, I would say, but then I've got nothing bad to say about Creepshow. It's one of my favorite horror films, probably my favorite anthology movie of all time. And it's really heavy on the fond memories of the production of this film. Definitely recommended. It's a really pleasant companion to this movie, and again shot at the right time when many of the cast and certainly the director George A. Romero was still alive. So something I treasure is this. I'll never get rid of this Blu-ray because of that particular documentary. Another couple of documentaries that I watch from time to time are the Video Nasties documentaries. There's these two that came out directed by Jake West in the UK called Moral Panic. Those are those. 3 discs on each. Only DVD, although I do believe the Blu-ray versions are coming out soon. The Video Nasties period is something that I lived through as a young kid. I was around about 10, 11 years old when it all kicked off. And so the excitement, the notoriety, the chase was on to get hold of these movies before they were taken off our shelves. And I watched these DVDs quite a lot, particularly given that I've covered a lot on the Video Nasties on this channel fairly recently. So I've kind of immersed myself in these documentaries a few times over the last few years. And it does really bring home what an insane time it was, living through all that moral panic and the press leaping all over the Video Nasties and just demonizing pretty much everything that was brought out on VHS when not a lot of it needed to be. Yeah, there were some harmful films out there, but they were easily flushed out, and there's still some in the UK that are not available today, or certainly some that are not available in their full uncut forms. But for the most part, the movies were either poor or just misjudged completely. And so I look back at these 2 documentaries with a lot of fondness, a lot of nostalgia, and a lot of relief that those sort of days are over now in the UK. Halloween's a franchise that we're really crying out for a decent, all-encompassing documentary on. There are a few out there that they're really surface level. I think the best one is the 25 Years of Terror documentary by Steph Hutchinson, directed by Steph Hutchinson. British guy, really good guy. I've met him on a few occasions. Shout out to Steph. It's probably the best one that's available at the moment. But the Biography channel also did this Halloween inside story back in 2006, directed by Jeff Collins. Now, it's informative, I guess, but it really is surface level. There's not a lot you're going to learn from this whatsoever. It's kind of designed, I guess, for mainstream accessibility, and it plays it really safe. You're a hardcore fan, it plays it too safe. So as I said, you're not going to learn a great deal from this. This is something that you stumble across on a Freeview channel late at night that lacks the depth of something like Never Sleep Again, More Brains, or Just Desserts even. But it is, I guess, a solid entry-level overview. If you're just getting into Halloween, then yeah, you might look at this and think, actually, yeah, I learned something from that. But managed to get this Biography channel DVD of it some time ago, and I'll hang on to it because every now and again I do just pop it in, but I don't learn anything new ever. One of the holy grails for me is this movie, which is Terror in the Aisles, which is a documentary that came out when I was a real young lad, around about 11, 12 years old. Terror in the Aisles is directed by Michael Kuhn. It's about 88 minutes and was released by Universal Pictures in 1984. And it's kind of, for me, it was perfect at the time. It was a gateway horror experience. It taught me about a lot of movies that I hadn't heard of or hadn't seen. Rosemary's Baby, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Exorcist. I'd seen Jaws around then, but it was great to see it on this documentary. It concentrates a lot on Halloween and Friday the 13th, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and a lot of Hitchcock as well. It became a Bible for me as I was growing up. I would sit there and I'd watch this on repeat, just getting to learn about all these different movies. However, it's more montage, I guess, than analysis. You're not going to learn a great deal from it. It's just a nicely put together extended trailer, I guess, for horror as it stood in 1984, going back all the way to, I don't know, maybe Frankenstein in the 30s. But it's got huge nostalgia appeal, and it has Nancy Allen and Donald Pleasance as your hosts on this film. So if you haven't seen it, folks, definitely check it out. I think there's probably close to maybe 100, 150 movies that are included in this documentary. It's a kind of blink and you'll miss it scenario. The commentary is interesting, but as I said, it's very surface level, and it would probably be quite boring to a horror fan these days. I think at the time, though, in the 80s, it was perfect for me. It was how I learned about horror and how I chose what I was going to watch next. So it's always going to be a favorite of mine when it comes to horror documentaries. This version here is released by Scream Factory. You can still get it, but it's also an extra on Shout Factory's, one of the early Halloween 2 Shout Factory versions. Terror in the Aisles, folks. Check it out. And then finally, we have Crystal Lake Memories, which, as with Never Sleep Again, is directed by Daniel Farrands. He did this particular movie after Never Sleep Again, done at the perfect time when all the cast was still around. It's amazing how many people they get access to in this documentary. I'd say this is the absolute gold standard when it comes to deep dives into horror. I watched this again over the weekend, and I was surprised at how much stuff in there I'd forgotten about and relearnt again. There's some great additional footage on here, stuff that you haven't seen before, anecdotes you've never heard about before, cast members that are no longer with us being interviewed. It's no holds barred. They talk about everything. They talk about the awkwardness of Friday the 13th Part 5. They talk about Savini refusing to come back for Friday the 13th Part 2. It's all there in this particular documentary. It is the gold standard, and given Daniel Farrands' connections with Halloween, it'd be really cool if one day he could put one of these together on the Halloween franchise. All 13 movies included and covered. This one goes on for over 6 hours, so a Halloween documentary is bound to go on for a good 7 or 8. If it does come along at any point, I'll be there waiting. But for me right now, I think this is the best horror documentary that's out there. And if you're a Friday the 13th fan, definitely get your hands on this. And also, that ties in nicely with the live stream that I'm doing this week. as you know, it's Friday the 13th this Friday. I'm going to do a live stream this Thursday night. We've already started the votes in the community section. We've already picked 10 of the best kills from Friday the 13th to vote on. It's a live tier ranking. There'll be 20 of the kills from the franchise included, and you get to live vote via a link during the stream. So 10 o'clock this Thursday evening at 5 p.m. Eastern time. I'll look forward to seeing you all there. And let me know down below what your favorite horror documentaries are. I know there are some that I haven't covered on this. There are a lot out there. There's a Texas Chainsaw Massacre one that's part of the extra features on the Second Sight box set. There's also The Fear of God, the Exorcist documentary. There's lots of them. There's Going to Pieces, American Nightmare. There's plenty of them out there. But let me know what your favorites are down below. And don't forget, tune in this Thursday, only stands 10 p.m. UK time, 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll be doing that Friday the 13th. I nearly said Halloween then. We'll be doing that Friday the 13th kill list tier ranking that you guys have all chosen. So I'll see you then. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.